Welcome to the Ego versus EQ and You podcast, where we discuss the key aspects of emotional intelligence and ways to apply it in everyday living. Now let's work together to make common sense more common. Welcome back to the podcast, and today we're going to talk about the temptation to make assumptions, which we all do. But I was thinking about this topic and reminded of a story that I was told one time when I was working with an assisted living provider. And there was a salesperson at one of the communities that shared this story with me. They had a prospect, and a female potential resident who had come to the community, had done multiple tours, really enjoyed being there, actually came a lot and kind of hung out with everybody there. And they kept asking her, when do you want to move in? She owned a home, so she'd have to sell her house to go. But they kept, trying to move her along in the process and get her committed to moving in with them. And she just kept putting it off, and she just kept delaying. And they would ask her, what's the holdup? And she'd just say, well, I'm just not ready. And so they kind of wrote it off like, well, she's never going to come. And the salesperson said one day she was in, and she was having lunch in the dining room with the rest of the residents. And I decided to just sit with her and chat with her and kind of learn her story. And so instead of, she kind of went out of sales mode and how great the community was and into, tell me about you. Tell me about your life. And so she sat down and had a long conversation with her. And through that conversation, she learned that this woman had adopted a daughter, but the daughter did not know that she was adopted. And lost in her house somewhere was the adoption papers. And she said, I am worried that if she comes and helps me move, she's going to find them, and then she'll be very upset with me for not telling her sooner and everything that went along with that. And so it really it was an eye-opener for this salesperson who realized it wasn't that she didn't want to come in. It wasn't that she wasn't ready. She had this whole other concern that no one had uncovered because they hadn't spent any time really talking to her. So they helped her. They said, we'll come help you. We'll see if we can find it so you don't have to worry about your daughter if you're not ready to tell her. And it all worked out. But I think it's so common for us to make assumptions. We make assumptions about people. And depending on your balance between reality testing and optimism, which are two EQ skills, some people will assume the best and some people will assume the worst. And frankly, one of my negative traits is because I spend so much time analyzing behavior, I'm quick to judge. I don't know if anyone else does this, but I will assume a whole backstory about somebody knowing very little about them. I just make this big assumption about who they are and why they do what they do. And, things like, oh, she wants all this information because she's a control freak, or he's unprepared because he's lazy. He's asking for ideas because he wants all the credit for himself. I do that stuff all the time. I don't know if you guys do too, but it all comes back to this thing I learned a few years ago I thought was so interesting and helpful. It's called the fundamental attribution error. And it's a human cognitive bias that we all have, and it causes us to underemphasize situational factors and overemphasize personality or character traits. And so it's when we see something we don't like, a behavior that we perceive to be negative or disruptive, we will assume it's because they're not a good person or they've got a personality flaw in some way. But really, if we were in that exact same situation, we might do the exact same thing. So it's a way to kind of separate out who somebody is from what they're doing. And there's multiple sides, right, to every story. So it's also important that we catch ourselves and seek other information before we decide to judge, and hopefully avoid what we call confirmation bias, which is I'm only going to seek out information that reinforces what I already believe. So I think about this a lot because in my own example, about a dozen years ago now, I was newly divorced on a Southwest flight and randomly sat next to a guy named David. And he now today is my husband. And it would have been really easy because we chatted quite a bit on that first flight about, our lives and our story. And I learned on that first flight that he had been divorced and single for like 10 years. And so I kind of thought, single for 10 years. Why? Right? He was still very friendly with his former wife. He had 6 children, and they were between married and high school. And he was a Mormon. So all my assumptive, judgy red flags went up, right? And I really thought, okay, I'm going to give this a chance. I'm going to learn as much as I can about this before I just take that business card and chuck it in the trash. So we spent almost 6 months emailing each other and connecting in between our various travels. And I really tried to just get to know him and put all those assumptions aside. And in some ways, we are a very unlikely couple. So I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember the show Coach, but Hayden Fox and Christine Armstrong were kind of like the real life Hayden and Christine, because David can be very loud and unfiltered and opinionated, and I'm not. I tend to be a little bit more reserved and a little bit more controlled. But it really works for us. He's also one of the most emotionally self-aware people that I've met, especially for a guy. And he is fiercely protective and loyal and authentic and real. And so, I'm so glad now that I didn't just make an assumption on some facts that I learned about him then, because now I'm the happiest I've ever been. We have this big blended family of 8 kids, 5 boys, 3 girls, 9 grandchildren. It's a very busy, full life, but a good one. So try, you never know. When you suspend assumptions, it gives you an opportunity to learn something and maybe find something in your life that you never thought you'd want or need, but might result in great happiness. So in a nutshell, if you're trying to judge less and have more empathy, ask somebody about their story. Learn more about their backstory and their history, and that can really help enlighten us a lot. If you're a leader, keep in mind that you might have 1 or 2 people whispering in your ear about somebody else, and it's easy to then make an assumption based on that data. But try to delay forming an opinion about them until you've gone and asked for multiple opinions from others. And then, of course, use some self-awareness yourself to catch yourself if you realize that you are making assumptions, and ask yourself, how do I know that this is true? Or who else have I asked about this? That's more of that reality testing I mentioned earlier. So hopefully this gives you some good ideas and some reminders on the ways to avoid making assumptions. Even though it's human nature for us to all do it, it's something we constantly have to be aware of. Good luck with that. It's an ongoing challenge. I share that with you as well. Okay, well, thanks for listening to this episode, and we will catch you next time. Thanks for joining us today on the Ego versus EQ and You podcast. If you liked this episode, be sure to follow us or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and please share our show with others. For questions or future topic suggestions, please email us at podcast@jenshirkani.com. Until next time, keep using your EQ and show ego who's boss.